At family dinner, my husband snapped at my mother to cook for everyone. His mom chuckled, "Women like her belong in the kitchen, not at the table," while his sister whispered, "She's nothing but a servant." That's when a voice thundered from the doorway, "Who dares insult my family?" The entire room froze when they saw who it was. My mother-in-law's voice carried across our dining room with practiced precision. "Well, at least Paige knows her place in the kitchen. Some people are just natural servants, aren't they?" She said it casually, like commenting on the weather, while my mother stood frozen in the doorway holding the casserole she'd spent all morning preparing. That was 3 hours ago. Now, at 5:30 a.m., I'm making my husband's breakfast and wondering how many more times I can watch my mother's dignity get stripped away before something inside me breaks completely. The eggs sizzled in the pan while I replayed Claire's words. Natural servants. The phrase lodged in my chest like shrapnel. My mother had worked in the hospital cafeteria for 23 years, not because she was a natural servant, but because she needed to feed her children after my father died. She'd memorized every doctor's coffee order, learned the names of every janitor's grandchildren, and somehow managed to save enough from her minimum wage job to help me through community college. Natural servant. The words tasted bitter as I flipped Dustin's eggs. He liked them over easy with the yolk intact, wheat toast golden but not brown, coffee with exactly 1 sugar stirred 3 times counterclockwise. 3 years of marriage had taught me that Hayes men had specific requirements for everything. The right temperature for their shower water. The right thread count for their sheets. The right kind of wife who knew when to speak and when to disappear. I'd learned to meet those requirements, to fold myself into smaller and smaller spaces until I barely recognized the woman staring back from the microwave's reflection. "You're up early," Dustin said, entering the kitchen while adjusting his tie. He didn't kiss me good morning anymore. Hadn't for months. Physical affection was reserved for public displays at country club events where other partners might notice. "Your breakfast is ready," I said, plating his food with the precision of someone defusing a bomb. One wrong move, one slightly overcooked edge, and the entire morning would derail into a lecture about standards and maintaining the Hayes reputation. Before we continue, if you believe that every mother deserves dignity and respect regardless of her background, please consider subscribing. It helps us share these important stories with others who understand. Now let me tell you what happened next. He sat at the breakfast bar, scrolling through his phone while eating. The silence between us had weight and texture, filled with all the things we no longer said to each other. I watched him eat the breakfast I'd prepared and thought about how my mother used to make us pancakes shaped like hearts on Sunday mornings, how she'd sing while cooking, how food was love in our house, not performance. "Mother wants to discuss the weekend dinner arrangements," he said without looking up. "She's invited the Brennans. You know how important they are to the firm." The Brennans. Old money Denver family whose approval could make or break careers in this city. Of course Claire would want to impress them. And of course that would mean my mother would spend the evening in the kitchen, preparing food she wouldn't be invited to eat, serving people who wouldn't acknowledge her existence except to criticize the temperature of their soup. "Will my mother be joining us for dinner?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "She's welcome to help with preparations," Dustin said, which was Hayes speak for no. She would not be sitting at the table. She would be standing behind it, refilling water glasses and clearing plates while everyone pretended she was invisible. By 10 a.m. I'd cleaned the breakfast dishes, arranged fresh flowers throughout the house, and was reviewing our social calendar when I heard a tentative knock at the door. Through the peephole, I saw my mother standing there with grocery bags, the generic store logos practically glowing against the manicured backdrop of our neighborhood. I opened the door quickly, ushering her inside before Mrs. Patterson could document this breach of the neighborhood's unspoken economic standards. "Found chicken on sale," Mom announced, lifting the bags with a pride that broke my heart. £3 for the price of 2. "Thought you might use it for that fancy dinner." She was wearing her good cardigan, the navy one she saved for parent-teacher conferences when I was young, for church on Easter, for moments that mattered. Visiting her daughter apparently required that level of formality now. I helped her carry the bags to the kitchen, noting how she'd wrapped everything in extra plastic, preparing for the worst even in something as simple as grocery transport. "Sandra's daughter just got into state," she said, unpacking the chicken with careful hands. "Full scholarship. Academic. Can you imagine? Her mother can't stop crying happy tears." She glowed with second-hand joy, The kind that came from celebrating other people's children because one of hers had vanished into the business world 7 years ago and the other had transformed into someone who flinched when her mother used the wrong fork at dinner. Mom reached for a cabinet, then hesitated, her hand hovering in the space between action and uncertainty. "The plates are in the upper right now," I said gently, though we both knew that wasn't what made her hesitate. It was the entirety of this kitchen with its sub-zero refrigerator and wine cooler and gadgets that cost more than her monthly rent. She didn't belong here and we both felt it. She looked around the kitchen taking inventory of all the ways my life had changed. Her eyes lingered on the knife block with its German steel, the mixer that cost $800, the copper pots hanging from their custom rack. When she looked back at me, her smile was forced and fragile. "I should have called first," she whispered. "Mom, you never need permission to visit your daughter." But the words rang hollow in this house where everyone needed permission for everything, where spontaneity had been replaced by scheduled appointments and formal invitations. That evening I was preparing dinner when Dustin burst through the door with champagne, his face bright with triumph. "Senior partner," he shouted, lifting me off my feet in a spin that made the room blur. "Youngest in the firm's history." The partners voted unanimously. For a fleeting moment I was 23 again, in love with a man who promised me the world. I kissed him, tasting success and ambition and the faint hint of the scotch he'd had at lunch to celebrate. This was what he'd worked for, what he'd sacrificed everything to achieve, including parts of us I hadn't realized were negotiable. "That's wonderful," I said, and almost meant it entirely. "Mother insists on a proper celebration this weekend. The entire family, plus a few key clients." There was proper. The Hayes family had turned that word into a weapon, wielding it against anything that didn't fit their narrow definition of acceptable. My mother's accent wasn't proper. Her clothes weren't proper. Her existence at their dinner table wasn't proper. But her food was proper enough to serve. Her labor was proper enough to exploit. That night, after Dustin had fallen asleep following too much champagne and self-congratulation, my phone rang. Mom's picture appeared on the screen, the one from last Christmas where she wore the sweater I'd bought her, trying to smile despite everything. "I'm sorry to call so late, baby." Her voice was thick with tears she was trying to hide. I slipped out to the living room, wrapping myself in the throw blanket she'd crocheted for our first apartment. "What's wrong, Mom?" "I saw him. On the news. That tech conference in Seattle. Looked just like Marcus. The way he walked, the way he held his shoulders when he was listening to someone speak." My chest tightened. We'd been through this before. Ghost sightings of my brother in crowds, in magazines, in every successful young man with dark hair and ambitious eyes. 7 years of false hopes and dashed dreams, of my mother seeing her son in strangers because the alternative was accepting he'd chosen to disappear. "Did you get a good look?" I asked gently. "They only showed him for a second. But Haley, I swear it was him. He had that same little scar above his eyebrow from when he fell off his bike." I heard rustling as she pulled out her tablet, the one I'd bought her last year so she could video call if Marcus ever reached out. She'd transferred every photo she had of him onto it, creating a digital shrine to the son who'd promised to come back. We scrolled through pictures together, connected by technology but separated by miles and choices neither of us had fully made. There was Marcus at 18, graduation cap slightly crooked, grinning at the camera with the confidence of someone who knew he was destined for greatness. There was Marcus teaching me to ride a bike, his hand steady on my back. There was Marcus and Mom at his last birthday with us, neither of them knowing it would be the final celebration. 7 years, baby," she whispered. 7 years without my boy. Did I do something wrong? Was I not enough? Mom, no. Never think that. But even as I comforted her, I wondered if I was following Marcus's path, just more slowly. Erasing myself piece by piece, becoming someone our mother couldn't recognize, all in the name of belonging to a world that would never truly accept us. At least Marcus had the courage to make a clean break. I was dying by 1,000 small surrenders, each proper dinner, each swallowed protest, each time I watched my mother be humiliated and said nothing. "Who are you talking to?" Dustin's voice called from the bedroom, irritated at being woken. "Just reviewing tomorrow's schedule," I lied smoothly. Another surrender. Another piece of myself traded for peace. After Mom hung up, I sat in the dark living room, surrounded by things that weren't really mine, in a life that fit like a coat made for someone else. Tomorrow I would make Dustin's breakfast perfectly. This weekend I would watch my mother serve his family while they pretended she was furniture. But something was building inside me, a pressure that had been growing since Claire's words that afternoon. Natural servant. The phrase echoed in the darkness, and I wondered how much longer I could keep pretending that any of this was acceptable. How many more times could I watch my mother's dignity get stripped away before something inside me finally shattered? The clock on the mantel ticked toward dawn, and I knew that soon I would return to the kitchen, crack eggs into a pan and continue the performance. But for now, in the darkness, I allowed myself to imagine a different life. One where my mother sat at the head of the table. Where my brother came home. Where I remembered who I used to be before I learned to make myself small enough to fit into the Hayes family's proper world. Friday arrived with the weight of dread settling in my stomach. The morning started with Claire's first phone call at 8 a.m., her voice sharp through the speaker as I peeled potatoes. Remember, Haley, the Waterford crystal for water, the baccarat for wine. And please ensure the silver is actually polished this time. Last month's dinner, the forks had water spots. Water spots that only she could see, on forks that had been polished 3 times. I agreed to everything while browning the meat for Mom's pot roast recipe, the one she'd perfected over 30 years of Sunday dinners. The smell filled the kitchen with memories of our old apartment, where happiness wasn't measured in crystal classifications but in second helpings and laughter. Claire called again at noon to remind me about the proper spacing between place settings. Then at 2 to discuss the appropriate background music. Each call ended with her signature warning. Remember, this reflects on all of us. Mom arrived at 4, an hour before anyone else, carrying a pie she'd made from scratch. She stood at my front door in her best dress, a navy blue piece she'd found at Goodwill and altered herself. The fabric was quality, probably expensive once, and she'd pressed it until every line was perfect. Her earrings were small pearls, not real but polished until they gleamed. She tried so hard to look appropriate, to fit into this world that actively rejected her. I brought dessert, she said, holding up the pie like an offering. Apple. Made it this morning with those Honey Crisps from the farmer's market. Before I could respond, Claire's Mercedes pulled into the driveway. She emerged wearing a dress that cost more than Mom made in 3 months, her expression shifting from neutral to disapproving the moment she saw my mother. Paige, how punctual, Claire said, her gaze traveling from Mom's carefully styled hair to her discount store shoes. Actually, this works perfectly. You might be more comfortable helping in the kitchen while we set up. All those courses and special preparations, you understand. The dismissal was delivered with a smile that never reached her eyes. Mom's shoulders dropped slightly, but she nodded, already moving toward the kitchen before I could protest. Faith arrived moments later with her latest boyfriend, a banker named Preston who looked at our house like he was appraising it for sale. Is that your mother's car? Faith asked, pointing to Mom's 15-year-old Honda. So authentic. Very working class chic. She laughed at her own joke while examining Mom's pie on the counter. Homemade. How quaint. Though Mother already ordered dessert from that French pâtisserie downtown. The dinner began at 7 with everyone seated around our dining table except Mom, who stood by the kitchen door like a waitress awaiting orders. I'd set a place for her, but Claire had removed it while I was getting wine from the cellar, explaining that we needed more room for the serving dishes. As we settled into the first course, Faith's friend, a woman named Margaret who worked at Dustin's firm, leaned toward Faith and whispered loud enough for the entire table to hear, "Is that the help? She looks familiar." "That's Haley's mother," Faith replied with barely concealed amusement. "She helps out sometimes." Mom had just reached for her water glass, using the wrong hand, picking up the wrong fork to eat her salad. The movement was simple, human, normal anywhere else but here. Claire's laugh tinkled through the air like breaking glass. "Oh, Paige," she said with exaggerated patience, "formal dining must be so overwhelming for you. The fish fork is the smaller one on the outside. Though I suppose in your usual dining situations, one fork does everything." The table erupted in polite laughter while Mom's face flushed deep red. She set down the fork carefully, precisely, her hands disappearing into her lap. Dustin's hand found mine under the table, his grip tight. Not comforting. Warning. His thumb pressed hard against my palm, a silent command to stay quiet, to not make a scene, to let his mother's cruelty pass unchallenged. The courses continued, each one bringing new opportunities for subtle humiliation. When Mom didn't know which wine glass to use, Preston made a joke about public school education. When she tried to join a conversation about travel, mentioning a trip to the state fair, Margaret actually snorted. How charming. State fairs. Do they still have those? Between the main course and dessert, I escaped to check on something in the kitchen and found the bathroom door slightly open. Mom stood at the sink, red wine spreading across the front of her dress like blood. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Mom. I pushed the door open fully. I'm fine, she said quickly, dabbing at the stain with paper towels. Faith was passing behind me and her elbow caught my glass. Just an accident. But I'd seen Faith's accidents before. The precision with which she could destroy something while maintaining perfect deniability. Mom's hands trembled as she tried to blot the wine from the fabric she'd spent an hour ironing. I'm ruining everything, she whispered. Dustin's celebration, your dinner party. I shouldn't have come. I don't belong here. The words cut deeper than any knife. My mother, who'd worked 16-hour shifts to keep us fed, who'd never missed a parent-teacher conference despite exhaustion, who'd given up her own dreams so Marcus and I could have ours, believed she was ruining things by simply existing in this space. Here, I said, pulling off my cashmere cardigan. Wear this. She protested, knowing how expensive it was, but I wrapped it around her shoulders anyway. The sweater covered the stain but couldn't hide the defeat in her eyes. As she fixed her makeup with shaking hands, reapplying lipstick that had worn off from nervous lip biting, I wanted to burn the entire house down. Instead, I helped her clean the wine from her hands and told her she looked beautiful. We returned to find them serving Claire's ordered desserts. Mom's homemade pie pushed to the side, forgotten. The conversation had shifted to vacation homes and investment properties, things so far from Mom's reality they might as well have been speaking another language. She sat silently, invisible, a ghost at her own daughter's table. Later, after everyone had gone and Mom had insisted on helping clean despite being a guest, Dustin and I prepared for bed in our master suite. The silence between us vibrated with everything unsaid. Your mother was hurt tonight, I finally said, watching him remove his watch, his cufflinks, the armor of success. He sighed the way he did when I brought up anything inconvenient. She needs to understand her place in this family, Haley. She's not a Hayes. She's my mother. And you've adapted beautifully to our world. You learned the rules, the expectations. Why can't she? The casual cruelty of his words stole my breath. Adapted. Like I was a rescue dog who'd learned not to soil the carpets. He climbed into bed, his back to me, the conversation clearly over in his mind. You promised to love everything about me, I said to his turned back. Including where I came from. I do love you, he replied without turning. I loved you enough to help you become better than where you came from. The words hung in the darkness between us, a verdict on everything I'd been before him. Better than where I came from. As if my mother's love, her sacrifice, her strength were things to be overcome rather than honored. I stared at the ceiling, counting the revolutions of the ceiling fan, remembering the apartment where Mom and I had lived after Marcus left. The walls were thin and the carpet was worn, but no one had ever suggested we needed to be improved or fixed or made better. Dustin's breathing deepened into sleep while I lay awake, replaying every moment of humiliation from the evening. Faith's calculated wine spill. Claire's surgical strikes disguised as concern. The way everyone had laughed at Mom's expense while she served them food she'd helped prepare. Preston's comment about her quaint working-class wisdom, when she'd mentioned rain coming based on her arthritis. My phone lit up with a text from Mom. Thank you for dinner. Sorry about the dress. I'll wash your sweater and return it next week. Even now, hours later, she was apologizing. For the wine Faith had spilled. For borrowing my sweater. For existing in a space where her existence was treated as an inconvenience. I typed and deleted a dozen responses before finally sending, I love you, Mom. You have nothing to apologize for. But that was a lie. In the Hayes family world, she had everything to apologize for. Being poor. Being genuine. Being herself. And I had become complicit in demanding those apologies through my silence, my adaptation, my beautiful transformation into someone better than where I came from. Sunday morning arrived with an unexpected knock that pulled me from restless sleep. Through the peephole, I saw Mom standing on my doorstep holding a cardboard box, her face drawn with exhaustion. Dustin had left early for golf with clients, giving me a rare morning alone. I opened the door to find her eyes red-rimmed as if she'd been crying for hours. "I've been going through Marcus's room," she said without preamble, setting the box on my coffee table with reverent care. "I know it's been 7 years, but I kept thinking he'd want his things when he came back." The box contained pieces of my brother's abandoned life. His high school yearbook. A watch our father had left him. Academic achievement awards carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. Mom's hands trembled as she pulled out an envelope, worn soft from handling. "I found this tucked inside one of his textbooks," she said, handing it to me. "It's addressed to us, but he never sent it." The letter was dated 2 weeks after he'd left for New York. His handwriting, usually so confident, looked shaky. "Mom and Haley," it began, "by the time you read this I'll be somebody. Not just Marcus who studied by streetlight. Not just another kid from the wrong neighborhood. I'll be somebody who can take care of you both. I'll come back when I'm somebody worth knowing." Mom sank onto my couch, suddenly looking every one of her 58 years. New streaks of gray threaded through her hair that hadn't been there last month. The lines around her eyes had deepened, carved by 7 years of scanning crowds for a face that never appeared. "Do you think he forgot us?" she asked, her voice small. "Or do you think he looks at where he is now and feels ashamed of where he came from?" The question hung between us because I couldn't offer comfort without lying. Marcus had vanished so completely it felt deliberate. No social media presence. No forwarding address. No trail to follow except rumors of his success that floated back to us through strangers. "Maybe he's still becoming somebody," I offered weakly. Mom touched the letter with gentle fingers. "He was always somebody to me. From the moment he was born. Didn't he know that?" Wednesday afternoon I met Linda at a coffee shop downtown, far from the Hayes family's usual territory. She looked exactly the same as in college, wearing jeans and a vintage band t-shirt, her authenticity a sharp contrast to my carefully curated appearance. We'd been study partners once, then friends, then slowly nothing as my world shifted to accommodate the Hayes family requirements. "You look expensive," Linda said, but it wasn't a compliment. "Very put together. Very not you." "People change," I said, stirring my latte with unnecessary focus. "Do they? Or do they get changed?" The question sat between us as she studied my designer handbag, my manicured nails, the wedding ring that cost more than her car. "Why don't you ever invite me to your house anymore, Haley? We used to cook dinner together every Friday. Now I have to schedule coffee 3 weeks in advance. Things are just busy with Dustin's career and family obligations." "Family obligations." She repeated the phrase like it tasted sour. "Is that what you call it when your mother-in-law treats your mom like household staff?" The words hit me like cold water. "How did you?" "I ran into your mom at the grocery store last week. She was buying silver polish because apparently your mother-in-law complained about water spots at some dinner party. She looked defeated, Haley. Absolutely defeated. And she kept apologizing for not having time to chat because she needed to help prepare for another event at your house." "It's complicated," I started, but Linda cut me off. "The Haley I knew would never let anyone treat her mother like a maid. The Haley I knew would have burned everything down before allowing that to happen." "What happened to her?" I didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound like betrayal, so I made excuses about needing to leave early for an appointment. Linda's parting words followed me to the parking lot. "Your mom deserves better. And deep down you know it." I sat in my car for 20 minutes, crying behind designer sunglasses that cost enough to pay Mom's rent, wondering when I'd become someone who needed scheduled appointments to see old friends, someone who allowed my mother's dignity to be currency for my acceptance into a world that would never truly accept either of us. Thursday's country club luncheon was mandatory. Claire had made that clear. "Important connections," she'd said. "People who matter." I arrived to find her holding court near the bar, surrounded by women whose faces barely moved thanks to various procedures, their laughter as artificial as their lips. "There she is," Claire announced as I approached. "My little project." The women tittered as she continued. "You wouldn't believe what I started with. Haley didn't even know fish forks existed. But I'm civilizing her bit by bit. It's my charity work, really, taking someone from that background and making them presentable." "How generous," one woman said. "Though it must be challenging. Nature versus nurture and all that." "Oh, the mother still works in food service," Claire said with exaggerated pity. Can you imagine? At her age? But some people just lack ambition. Though she makes decent enough appetizers when we need extra help for parties. They laughed about Mom's quaint little job, about her sweet attempts to fit in at family dinners, about how she probably felt so grateful to see her daughter's life upgrade. Each word was a knife, and I stood frozen behind a potted palm, my champagne glass trembling so violently I had to set it down before it shattered. At least she knows her place, another woman added. It would be so awkward if she expected to actually socialize with us. I fled to the bathroom where I vomited expensive champagne and shame into pristine porcelain, my reflection in the mirror showing someone I didn't recognize. Someone who stood silent while strangers laughed at her mother's expense. Someone who had become exactly what Claire wanted. A project, a trophy, evidence of the Hayes family's charitable nature. Saturday I went to help Mom clean her apartment, something I did less and less frequently. While she was gathering cleaning supplies, I found her journal on the nightstand. I shouldn't have read it, but the page was open, her handwriting visible. Maybe I'm the reason Marcus stays away. He's probably built something beautiful and I would just remind everyone where he came from. I flipped backward, each entry a fresh wound. Haley looked so uncomfortable when I hugged her at the club. I should remember not to do that in public. Claire suggested I eat in the kitchen next time. He's probably right. I don't want to embarrass anyone. Haley deserves better than a burden for a mother. The final entry dated yesterday stopped my heart. If I disappeared, maybe Haley could finally be happy in her new life. No more awkward dinners. No more apologies. She could tell people I moved away, or better yet, that I never existed at all. Mom found me crying over her journal, my tears staining pages filled with self-blame for crimes she hadn't committed. She tried to take it from me, embarrassed, but I held on. You are not a burden, I said fiercely. You have never been a burden. But honey, I see how hard it is for you. Trying to balance their world and me. I don't fit, and that's okay. Maybe it would be easier if I just... Don't you dare finish that sentence. We sat on her worn couch, the one we'd had since I was in high school, and I held her while she cried 7 years of accumulated hurt. She felt smaller than I remembered, as if the constant dismissals had physically diminished her. The woman who'd once stood up to landlords and fought for overtime pay and raised 2 children alone had been reduced to apologizing for her existence. I love you, I whispered into her gray-streaked hair. And I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But sorry wasn't enough. Sorry didn't undo 3 years of silent compliance. Sorry didn't erase the journal entries or the tears or the way she'd started to believe she was worth less than the people who treated her like furniture. Something had to change. Something had to break. I just didn't know yet that it would be everything. Monday morning, I drove to Mom's apartment to begin preparing for Dustin's partnership celebration. She had already cleared her entire kitchen counter, recipe cards spread across the surface like battle plans. Her face lit up when I walked in, holding grocery bags filled with ingredients she'd bought with her last paycheck. I've been planning the menu all week, she said, pulling out a handwritten list. Mini beef Wellingtons, those stuffed mushrooms Claire liked that one time, 3 kinds of quiche, and my grandmother's secret recipe chicken sauté. She moved through her tiny kitchen with purpose, each movement efficient despite the limited space. This was her domain, where she transformed basic ingredients into magic despite having 1/4 the room of my designer kitchen. As we chopped vegetables side by side, she hummed with anticipation. This will show them I can contribute something special, she said, carefully wrapping each Wellington in puff pastry. Not just heating up store-bought food but real cooking. Maybe they'll see I have value beyond just cleaning up. My chest tightened watching her measure each portion precisely, writing labels with her neat handwriting. Beef Wellington medium rare, vegetarian quiche, nut-free, chicken some mild spice. She wanted so desperately to be seen as more than what they'd reduced her to. What I'd allowed them to reduce her to. We worked for 2 days straight, filling her freezer and mine with carefully prepared dishes. Mom insisted on making extras of everything, worried there wouldn't be enough. By Wednesday evening, we had enough food to feed twice the expected guests. She surveyed our work with satisfaction, flour still dusting her cheek. They're going to love this, she said with such hope it made my stomach hurt. Thursday afternoon, while Mom and I were loading the final dishes into my car, Claire's catering van pulled into my driveway. My heart sank as uniformed staff began unloading silver chafing dishes and professional serving equipment. Claire emerged from her Mercedes, surveying the scene with satisfaction. "The professionals are here," she announced, then noticed Mom's carefully labeled containers. "Oh, Paige, you cooked? How unnecessary. We have more than enough from the caterers." Mom's face fell, but she managed to smile. "Just a few things to help out." "How sweet. We'll find somewhere to put them." The party began at 6, with Denver's legal elite filling our home. Partners from competing firms, judges, city council members, all gathered to celebrate Dustin's achievement. Mom's food had been relegated to the back kitchen, hidden away, while the caterer's identical but inferior versions took center stage in the dining room. Mom stood near the kitchen door in her best dress, the same navy one from previous dinners, waiting for direction. Claire swept past her carrying a tray of the caterer's appetizers, making a show of presenting them to guests. "These are from La Maison," she announced loudly. "Only the best for Dustin's celebration." Though Paige insisted on helping, "She's so comfortable in kitchens, aren't you, dear?" The dismissal was public, deliberate. Several guests glanced at Mom with polite disinterest before returning to their conversations. She retreated into the kitchen where at least she could be useful without being seen. Later, I watched Mom attempt to join a conversation near the bar where three partners' wives discussed their recent European vacation. She stood at the edge of their circle, waiting for a pause to contribute. "Paris is lovely," Mom offered when they mentioned France. "I've always wanted to see the Eiffel Tower." Faith materialized beside her with surgical precision. "But you've never been anywhere, have you?" Her voice carried across the room. "I mean actual travel, not just watching the Travel Channel." The women tittered uncomfortably while Mom's cheeks burned. One tried to be kind, asking, "Where would you go if you could travel anywhere?" Before Mom could answer, Faith interjected, "Probably somewhere with a nice kitchen to work in. Some people just can't leave work behind, can they?" Dustin stood 3 feet away, champagne in hand, watching his sister humiliate my mother. When our eyes met, he actually laughed. Not uncomfortable laughter, not nervous laughter, but genuine amusement at my mother's expense. He raised his glass to me in a mock toast before turning back to his conversation. The kitchen had become a war zone of competing caterers and family politics. Mom tried to help the professional staff, but they treated her like an intruder in what had been her safe space. As she reached for a tray of the caterer's appetizers to pass, Claire's sharp voice cut through the chaos. "Paige, the shrimp tray needs refilling. Quickly now, the partners are waiting." Mom spun toward the counter, her hand catching the edge of a sheet pan fresh from the oven. The sound she made was small, swallowed quickly, but I saw her whole body tense with pain. The caterer barely glanced at her as she cradled her hand against her chest. I started toward her, but Dustin materialized at my elbow, his grip firm on my arm. "Don't make a scene," he hissed in my ear. "Not tonight. This is too important." His fingers pressed hard enough to bruise, holding me in place while Mom disappeared down the hallway. I found her in the guest bathroom, running cold water over an angry red burn across her palm. She was biting her lip hard enough to leave marks, tears streaming silently down her face. "Let me see," I said, gently taking her hand. The burn was worse than I'd thought, already blistering. "I'm fine," she insisted, trying to pull away. "I don't want to ruin Dustin's party." "You're not ruining anything." I found the first aid kit, carefully applying burn cream and wrapping her hand with gauze. "They're ruining you." "Don't say that." Her voice was fierce despite the pain. "This is your life now. Your good life. I can handle a little burn." But it wasn't just the burn. It was everything. The accumulation of 1,000 small cruelties, each one taking a piece of her dignity until there was almost nothing left. I helped her fix her makeup, watched her practice smiling in the mirror until it looked believable, then sent her back to serve people who saw her as furniture. The party continued for 3 more hours. 3 hours of watching Mom serve drinks with her bandaged hand hidden beneath a dish towel. 3 hours of Claire taking credit for food she hadn't made. 3 hours of Faith's barbed comments and Dustin's complicit silence. 3 hours of prominent Denver residents treating my mother like she was invisible except when they needed something. I couldn't take it anymore. I escaped to the powder room, locking the door behind me. My phone sat heavy in my purse, the weight of 7 years of silence. I pulled up the contact I'd hidden under work emergency and stared at the number. Marcus's last known phone number, saved from a birthday card he'd sent the first year he left. My thumbs moved across the screen, typing and deleting message after message. How did you sum up 3 years of degradation in a text? How did you call for help from someone who might have forgotten you existed? Finally, I typed 5 words. This is Haley. They're destroying Mom. My finger hovered over send. Once this message left, there was no taking it back. No pretending everything was fine. No maintaining the facade of a happy Hayes wife. Outside the bathroom door, I heard Mom's voice apologizing to someone for something that wasn't her fault. Always apologizing. Always diminishing herself to fit into smaller and smaller spaces. I hit send. The message showed as delivered but not read. I stared at the screen, willing it to change, willing some sign that my brother was out there, that he remembered us, that he still cared enough to answer a cry for help from the sister he'd promised to protect. Nothing. I splashed cold water on my face and returned to the party, where Mom was cleaning up a champagne spill while the person who'd knocked over the glass stood watching her without offering to help. The burn on her hand had bled through the bandage, but she kept working, kept smiling, kept pretending this was normal. 20 minutes later, as I helped Mom load her empty containers into her car, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out with shaking hands, barely daring to hope. Tomorrow night. Family dinner. I'll handle everything. 5 words that changed everything. 5 words that meant my brother hadn't forgotten. 5 words that promised something I'd stopped believing in. Justice. I stood in Mom's parking lot, staring at my phone screen as if the words might disappear. Tomorrow night. Family dinner. I'll handle everything. The message glowed against the dark screen, sent from a number with a New York area code. My hands trembled as I read it again, then again, each time expecting the letters to rearrange themselves into disappointment. Marcus. After 7 years of nothing, my brother had answered in 20 minutes. Not with questions or excuses or gradual reconnection, but with a promise of action. I'll handle everything. The same words he used to say when neighborhood kids bothered me after school, when the landlord threatened eviction, when life became too heavy for a teenager to carry alone. I looked up at Mom's apartment window where she stood watching me leave, her bandaged hand raised in a small wave. The urge to run back upstairs and tell her everything nearly overwhelmed me. Your son is coming home. Marcus remembers us. Tomorrow night everything changes. But I couldn't risk it. If this was another ghost, another false hope, another dead end in 7 years of searching faces in crowds, it would destroy what remained of her spirit. Sleep never came that night. I lay beside Dustin, counting his breaths, watching shadows move across the ceiling while my mind raced through possibilities. The Marcus Morrison everyone whispered about in business circles. The tech mogul who'd built Morrison Industries from nothing. The billionaire who'd gone public 6 months ago in a deal that made headlines. Could that really be my brother? The same boy who'd eaten cereal for dinner when Mom worked late shifts? Friday morning arrived with Dustin's voice cutting through my exhaustion. We need to have another family dinner tonight, he announced while adjusting his tie in our bedroom mirror. Something intimate but important. Judge Harrison mentioned he might stop by, and Mother wants to ensure we make the right impression. My pulse quickened. Tonight. Is that a problem? He glanced at me with mild irritation. You don't have one of your little book clubs or whatever, do you? No, I just thought after last night's party. Last night was for the firm. Tonight is for family and select guests. Mother's already arranged everything. He paused, his reflection meeting my eyes in the mirror. Your mother should come. She does make excellent food even if her presentation needs work. The casual cruelty of it, delivered while he straightened his collar, made my stomach turn. But this time, instead of swallowing my anger, I let it fuel something else. Anticipation. We should host here, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. Our apartment. More intimate than your parents' house. Dustin turned, eyebrows raised. You want to host? After that disaster with the caterers last night. I'll handle everything. The words came out firm, borrowing strength from a message on my phone. He studied me for a moment and I saw him catalog the changes. My straight spine, my direct gaze, the absence of my usual apologetic deference. Fine. But everything needs to be perfect. Mother will be watching for any mistakes. After he left, I called Mom. There's another dinner tonight. At our place. Her sigh carried the weight of exhaustion. Should I cook something? Just come as yourself, Mom. That's all I need. But Claire expects. Please. Just trust me. Wear something you feel beautiful in. There was a long pause. Haley, are you all right? You sound different. Different. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. Same designer clothes, same styled hair, same haze-approved appearance. But something had shifted in my eyes. A spark that had been dormant for 3 years. I'm better than all right, I told her. I'll see you at 7. I spent the afternoon preparing with meticulous care, but not in the way Claire would expect. No elaborate place settings or complex menu. Instead, I made Mom's pot roast recipe, the one that filled our childhood home with warmth. I used regular plates, not the haze china. I opened windows to let actual air flow through the apartment instead of relying on artificial freshener. For the first time in 3 years, I prepared my home like it was actually mine. At 4 o'clock, I watched from the window as Mom walked into a discount store. 20 minutes later, she emerged with a small bag, and I knew without looking what it contained. New earrings. She was spending money. She didn't have to try to look presentable for people who would never see her as anything more than the help. She arrived at 6:30 before everyone else, wearing the navy dress she'd worn to every Hayes family event, but this time with small silver earrings that caught the light when she moved. She'd styled her hair differently, softer around her face, and applied lipstick with careful precision. How do I look? She asked, smoothing the fabric over her hips. Presentable. I pulled her into a fierce hug, breathing in the familiar scent of her drugstore perfume mixed with the vanilla extract she always dabbed behind her ears. You look perfect. He pulled back to study my face. What's going on, baby? You're scaring me a little. Nothing's wrong. I just love you. Her eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. Don't make me ruin my makeup. As she helped me set the table, I watched her practice conversation starters under her breath, consulting small notes she'd written on her palm about current events, the weather, anything that might make her seem worthy of inclusion. She'd rehearsed being interesting as if her natural self, the woman who'd raised 2 children alone, who'd worked herself to exhaustion for our dreams, who knew how to stretch $20 into a week of meals, wasn't interesting enough. At 7 sharp, the Hayes family arrived en masse. Claire swept in first, her gaze immediately cataloging everything wrong with my preparations. Paper napkins, Haley? Really? She touched the regular plates with obvious disdain. And you're serving pot roast? How rustic. Faith followed, her nose wrinkling at the smell of actual home cooking. It smells like a cafeteria in here, she announced to Preston, who'd accompanied her again. Some people just can't rise above their origins. Dustin's father, Harold, whom I rarely saw at family gatherings, surveyed the apartment like a general inspecting disappointing troops. Interesting choice for hosting important guests, he told Dustin. One should always know one's limitations. They settled around the table with the air of royalty forced to dine with peasants. Mom automatically moved toward the kitchen, but I caught her hand. Sit, I said loud enough for everyone to hear. You're a guest. Claire's eyebrows shot up. Surely Paige would be more comfortable. She'll be comfortable at the table. With family. The word family hung in the air like a challenge. Faith actually laughed. Family? That's generous. As we began eating, the usual performance started. Claire commented on the seasoning being rather aggressive for refined palates. Faith mentioned that pot roast was so heavy, so working class. Harold delivered a lecture on the importance of maintaining standards that felt pointed and deliberate. Through it all, I watched the clock. 7:15, 7:30, 7:45. Each minute stretched like an hour while Mom grew smaller in her chair, while the Hayes family grew bolder in their casual cruelty, while my secret hope began to feel like delusion. At 7:58, Claire launched into her favorite topic. You know, Paige, there's something admirable about people who know their station in life. Don't you agree? Not everyone needs to climb. Some people are meant to serve, and there's honor in that. Mom's hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. I suppose. Take you for example, Claire continued, her smile sharp as glass. You found your place in food service. It suits you. Some people are just naturally meant for kitchens. Faith leaned forward with predatory interest. Speaking of kitchens, shouldn't you be in ours? I mean, that's where you're most comfortable, isn't it? The clock on the mantel showed 8 o'clock exactly. That's when we heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Heavy. Confident. Approaching with the certainty of someone who belonged everywhere they went. The doorknob turned. The door swung open before anyone could respond, before I could even stand. The solid oak door that usually opened quietly on well-oiled hinges crashed against the wall with enough force to rattle the picture's frames. Every head at the table whipped toward the sound, forks suspended midway to mouths, wine glasses frozen in mid-sip. "She's nothing but a servant," Faith had just finished saying, the words still hanging in the air like poison gas. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, backlit by the hallway lights. For a moment nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The apartment itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Then he stepped forward into the light and the world shifted on its axis. The man who entered my dining room commanded the space with an authority that made the air itself feel heavier. He wore a charcoal suit that had been tailored to perfection, the kind of precision that whispered rather than shouted its expense. His shoes reflected the overhead lights as he moved, Italian leather that probably cost more than Mom's annual salary. But it was his presence that transformed the room, a controlled power that made everyone else seem suddenly small. "Who dares insult my family?" The voice that thundered from him wasn't loud in volume but in impact. It rolled through the apartment like a physical force, making Claire's wine glass tremble in her hand. His eyes swept the room, cataloging faces, positions, the tableau of cruelty he'd walked into. Those eyes. Dark, intense, older than I remembered but unmistakably familiar. The same eyes that had watched over me on playgrounds, that had stayed awake studying by candlelight when the electricity got cut off, that had looked back at me through an airplane window 7 years ago with promises he'd never kept. Till now. Marcus. My brother stood in my dining room like an avenging angel dressed in Armani, his jaw clenched with a fury I'd never seen before. He was broader than the skinny teenager who'd left us, his shoulders filling the doorway, his presence making our spacious apartment suddenly feel cramped. Success had transformed him physically, but underneath the expensive exterior, I could still see the boy who'd shared his last piece of bread with me when we had nothing else. Dustin's fork clattered to his plate. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, pure terror. His mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. Mr. Marcus Morrison." His voice cracked like a teenager's. "The Morrison Industries Marcus Morrison?" The transformation in the room was instant and absolute. Harold, who'd been lounging in his chair like he owned the place, shot upright so fast his knee hit the table, sending water glasses wobbling. Claire's perfectly composed mask shattered, her face draining of color until her makeup looked like paint on a corpse. Faith scrambled backward, her chair screeching against the hardwood floor as she tried to put distance between herself and the man in the doorway. As everyone in Denver knew that name. Morrison Industries had revolutionized cloud computing infrastructure, had contracts with every major corporation in the state, had gone public 6 months ago in an IPO that made headlines worldwide. Marcus Morrison was the mysterious CEO who rarely gave interviews, who controlled enough digital infrastructure to cripple half the country's businesses with a keystroke. The man Forbes had called the ghost billionaire, because he seemed to materialize from nowhere. And he was standing in my apartment looking at me with eyes that held 7 years of apology. "Hello, little sister," he said, his voice softening just for those 3 words. The wine glass slipped from Claire's nerveless fingers, shattering on the floor in a cascade of crystal and merlot. The sound broke whatever spell had frozen the room. Faith's phone fell from her hand, clattering across the table. Preston actually whimpered. Mom. She sat perfectly still, her hand frozen halfway to her mouth, a tremor running through her entire body. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, as if she was afraid that blinking might make him disappear. A sound escaped her, something between a gasp and a sob. "Marcus." The word was barely a whisper, a prayer, a question that contained 7 years of grief. He crossed the room in 3 strides, dropping to his knees beside her chair with no regard for his expensive suit. His hands, steady and strong, reached for hers, the same hands that had taught her to use a computer, that had fixed our broken appliances with wire and determination, that had wiped her tears when Dad died. "Mom," he said, and his voice broke on the word. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She touched his face with shaking fingers, tracing the scar above his eyebrow from the bike accident, feeling the reality of him. Then she collapsed forward into his arms, sobbing with the force of 7 years of suppressed hope. He held her while she cried, his own tears falling silently into her gray-streaked hair. "My boy," she kept saying. "My boy came home." The Hayes family sat frozen, watching their world reconstruct itself around a new reality. They'd spent 3 years tormenting the mother and sister of one of the most powerful men in Colorado. The calculation of their catastrophic mistake was visible on each face. Harold recovered first, his business instincts overriding his shock. "Mr. Morrison, we had no idea. Your family never mentioned." "My family," Marcus said, still holding our sobbing mother, "never mentioned me because you never gave them the chance to be anything more than servants in your eyes." He helped Mom back into her chair, then stood slowly, deliberately, his gaze moving from one Hayes face to another. When his eyes landed on Dustin, they narrowed to dangerous slits. "You," he said, the single word containing volumes. "You married my sister." Dustin nodded frantically, his usual eloquence deserting him. "Yes, I didn't know she was. I mean, I knew she had a brother, but not you." "Not me." Marcus repeated the words slowly, tasting them. "Would it have mattered? If I was still Marcus Morrison from the wrong side of Denver, would you have treated them any differently?" The question hung in the air, unanswered because everyone knew the truth. My brother's success was the only thing that made our humanity visible to them. Faith tried to shrink into her chair, but Marcus's attention had already shifted to her. "You called my mother a servant. Said she belongs in the kitchen." "I didn't mean," Faith started. "You meant exactly what you said." His voice was calm, conversational, which somehow made it more terrifying. "You've meant every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, every deliberate humiliation you've inflicted on them for 3 years." Claire found her voice, though it shook. "This is all a misunderstanding. We've always welcomed Paige and Haley into our family." "Welcomed?" Marcus pulled out his phone, swiping to something before holding it up. "Should I read the text you sent your son last week? The one about keeping the help in the kitchen during important dinners? Or would you prefer I share the email where you called my sister a charity case? You were civilizing." Claire's mouth fell open. "How did you?" "Morrison Industries handles your firm's entire digital infrastructure," Marcus said simply. "Every email, every text, every cruel word you thought was private." The implications of that statement rippled through the room. Harold's face went from pale to gray. Dustin looked like he might be sick. Faith was crying, mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks. But I was watching my mother. She sat straighter in her chair, her tears drying, something returning to her eyes that had been missing for 3 years. Pride. My brother hadn't just come home. He'd come home as someone who could defend her, protect her, restore everything they tried to take from her. "Now," Marcus said, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that used to precede his worst revenges against neighborhood bullies, "let's discuss exactly what you've been doing to my family." Marcus moved toward Mom with deliberate calm, each step measured and purposeful. The Hayes family remained frozen in their chairs, watching him kneel beside her again. His hands, gentle now, reached for hers. That's when he saw it. The bandage wrapped around her palm, spotted with blood that had seeped through the gauze. "Let me see," he said softly, carefully unwrapping the bandage. The burn underneath was angry and blistered, clearly painful despite Mom's attempts to hide it. Marcus's jaw tightened as he examined the wound, his fingers barely touching the edges where the skin had bubbled and torn. "How did this happen?" His voice remained quiet, but something dark moved beneath the surface. Mom tried to pull her hand away. "It's nothing, just a little kitchen accident." "At the partnership party," I interrupted, unable to hold back anymore. She was rushing to refill appetizers because Claire commanded it. She burned herself on a pan, and when I tried to help her, Dustin told me not to make a scene. Marcus's head turned slowly toward Dustin, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. When he stood, he moved with the controlled precision of a predator. "You made my mother cook for you?" His voice had dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more threat than any shout. "Called her a servant? Said she belongs in the kitchen? And when she injured herself serving you, you were more concerned about appearances than her pain." Dustin raised his hands defensively, already pushing his chair back. "Now wait, I never meant." The punch cut off whatever excuse he was about to make. Marcus's fist connected with Dustin's jaw with a crack that echoed through the apartment. My husband toppled backward, his chair clattering across the floor as he went down hard, blood immediately streaming from his split lip and what looked like a broken nose. Claire screamed. Faith pressed herself against the wall. Harold half rose from his chair, then thought better of it when Marcus turned that dangerous gaze on him. The next person who moves or speaks without permission will regret it, Marcus said conversationally, stepping over Dustin's groaning form. He pulled out his phone again, swiping through screens with practiced efficiency. Let's discuss your crimes properly. 3 years of psychological abuse directed at my sister. Forcing her to abandon her counseling career. Systematic isolation from friends and support systems. Financial control through joint accounts you monitor obsessively. He looked up at Dustin, who was struggling to sit up, blood dripping onto his expensive shirt. Should I continue? You can't prove any of that, Harold said, finding his courage in legal technicalities. Marcus smiled, and it was terrifying. Morrison Industries processes 40% of this state's digital infrastructure. Your firm uses our servers, our security systems, our cloud storage. Every email Harold Hayes has sent about keeping the help in line. Every text Claire sent about civilizing the charity case. Every cruel joke Faith shared about my mother's servant mentality. He held up his phone. I have it all. 3 years of documented cruelty, archived and admissible. The blood drained from Harold's face as he calculated the implications. Claire's hands shook so badly she had to clasp them in her lap. Faith was crying harder now, mascara creating abstract art on her cheeks. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus continued, his tone shifting to pure business. First, immediate apologies. Real ones. On your knees if necessary. Second, Haley returns to her counseling career with full support, including a public statement from the Hayes family about how proud they are of her work with troubled youth. Third, my mother becomes an honored member of this family. Not tolerated. Not allowed. Honored. That's extortion, Harold said weakly. That's negotiation, Marcus corrected. I haven't reached extortion yet. Would you like me to? The threat hung in the air while Dustin finally managed to sit up, holding his sleeve to his bleeding nose. Marcus continued, pacing now, each step deliberate. The masterpiece, though, will be the charity gala. 2 weeks from now, the Hayes family will host a celebration in honor of Paige Morrison. 500 of Denver's most influential people will hear you toast her as a remarkable woman who raised 2 successful children against impossible odds. You'll establish a scholarship in her name for underprivileged students. You'll ensure every society page covers the event. You can't force us, Claire started. I can destroy you, Marcus interrupted smoothly. Your husband's firm depends on contracts I could terminate tomorrow. Your son's partnership exists because Judge Harrison, who coincidentally owes me several favors, recommended him. Your daughter Faith works for a company that Morrison Industries could buy and dissolve before lunch. 1 word from me and the Hayes family becomes radioactive in Denver society. He let that sink in, watching them absorb the full scope of their vulnerability. Then he turned to Mom, his entire demeanor shifting. Mom, he said gently. What do you want to say to them? Mom stood slowly, and for the first time in 3 years, she didn't hunch her shoulders or make herself small. She looked at each Hayes face in turn, Harold calculating losses, Claire trembling with rage and fear, Faith sobbing into her hands, Dustin bleeding on the floor. When she spoke, her voice carried a strength I hadn't heard since before Dad died. I forgive you, she said, and the words landed like another punch. Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry your poison anymore. I forgive you, but I'll never forget. Every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, every time you made me feel like less than human, I'll remember it all. She walked over to where Dustin sat and looked down at him with something like pity. You could have had a mother-in-law who would have loved you like her own son. Instead you chose this. She gestured to his bloodied face, his ruined reputation, his shattered arrogance. Claire found her voice, shaky but still attempting authority. Paige, surely we can discuss this reasonably. You had 3 years to be reasonable, Mom interrupted. 3 years when a kind word, a genuine smile, a single moment of treating me as equal would have changed everything. You chose cruelty instead. She turned to me then and her eyes were bright with tears, but also with something else. Liberation. Haley, my beautiful girl, you don't have to apologize for them anymore. You don't have to make yourself small to fit their expectations. You are not their project to improve. You are my daughter and you are perfect exactly as you are. The words broke something inside me. 3 years of suppressed tears came flooding out as I stood and went to her, feeling Marcus's hand on my shoulder, steady and protective like when we were children facing the world together. Please, Faith whimpered from her corner. Please, we're sorry. We're so sorry. Sorry because you're caught, Marcus said coldly. Sorry because there are consequences. But are you sorry for the pain you caused? For the dignity you stole? For the family you tried to destroy? The silence that followed was answer enough. 2 weeks, Marcus said finally. The gala will be perfect or I'll dismantle your lives piece by piece. Every slight against my family will be repaid with interest. Every humiliation will be returned tenfold. Harold cleared his throat carefully. If we do this, if we meet your terms, then what? Then you get to keep your wealth, your reputation, your positions. You get to continue living your privileged lives. But you'll do it knowing that your fortune, your comfort, your entire existence depends on the ongoing mercy of the woman you called a servant. Marcus helped Mom back to her chair, then looked at the Hayes family one last time. You thought poverty meant powerlessness. You thought kindness meant weakness. You thought you could treat my family however you wanted because they had no one to defend them. He pulled out his business card, expensive stock with minimal text, and dropped it on the table. You thought wrong. Dustin struggled to his feet, swaying slightly, his face already swelling. Haley, please, you're my wife. Am I? I heard myself say, my voice stronger than it had been in years. Because wives are partners. Equals. Not projects to be improved or embarrassments to be managed. The truth of it settled over the room like a funeral shroud. Everything had changed in the span of an hour. The Hayes family's carefully constructed superiority had crumbled, revealing the small, petty people they'd always been underneath the wealth and prestige. 6 months had passed since the night my brother walked back into our lives and shattered the Hayes family's carefully constructed kingdom. My counseling office on the 3rd floor of a community health center overlooked a playground where children chased each other in circles, their laughter floating through my open window. The space was small but mine, decorated with plants Mom had propagated from cuttings, artwork from teenage clients, and a photo from the charity gala that still made me smile every time I looked at it. I was reviewing case notes for my afternoon group session when Marcus appeared in the doorway, carrying bags from Goldberg's Deli. This had become our Tuesday and Thursday tradition. He'd arrive precisely at noon with pastrami sandwiches and potato salad, and we'd eat while catching up on our separate but intertwined lives. Mom held court at Lou Bernardine last night, he said, unpacking containers. The maitre d' knows her life story now. All of it. Including the time I tried to run away at age 10 and only made it to the corner store. I laughed, picturing our mother charming the staff at Denver's most exclusive restaurant. Did she show them photos? The entire graduation album. The server knew my GPA, my scholarship details, and how I used to fix computers for the neighbors to earn extra money. He shook his head, but his smile was warm. She told them about your first client here too. The kid who wouldn't talk to anyone else but opened up to you. We ate in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind of ease that had returned gradually over these 6 months. The 7-year gap hadn't disappeared entirely. There were still moments of careful navigation around certain topics, but we were finding our rhythm again. How's the divorce proceeding? Marcus asked, his tone carefully neutral. I'd filed the papers 3 months ago, finally admitting what had been clear that night. Dustin's being cooperative. He doesn't want a public battle, not after everything. The Hayes family had learned to fear negative publicity after the gala. The event had been everything Marcus demanded. 500 of Denver's elite watching Claire Hayes Morrison present my mother with a humanitarian award for raising exceptional children against overwhelming adversity. The scholarship fund in Mom's name had already sent 3 kids to college. He asked for another chance yesterday, I continued, pulling apart my sandwich. Came to couples therapy actually prepared, actually participating. Marcus raised an eyebrow. And? He said he finally understands who I really am. That he sees my value now. I met my brother's eyes. He sees my value because of you. Because I'm Marcus Morrison's sister. Not because I'm Haley. You deserve better than conditional recognition. I'm learning that. Sunday arrived with its new ritual. Marcus and I drove to Mom's apartment together, the same two-bedroom unit she'd lived in for 15 years. Marcus had offered her a house, a condo, a penthouse, anything she wanted. She'd refused them all. This is home, she'd said simply. Your father's memory is here. Your heights marked on the doorframe are here. Why would I leave? So Marcus had done the next best thing. He'd bought the building, renovated every unit, and reduced rent for all tenants to what they'd been paying a decade ago. Mom didn't know she was living rent-free. Marcus had arranged for her payments to go toward a fund for building maintenance. Her apartment smelled like pot roast and fresh bread when we arrived. She was at the stove, wearing an apron over a silk blouse she'd bought herself from Nordstrom. The dichotomy was perfectly her. Luxury mixed with practicality, new confidence wrapped in old comfort. Dinner's almost ready, she announced, then immediately launched into her latest news. Faith Hayes actually said please when she called yesterday. Can you imagine? Please, Mrs. Morrison, would you consider having lunch with me? Marcus and I exchanged glances over her head. Faith had been trying to rehabilitate her image for months, taking etiquette lessons of a different sort, how to treat people with basic respect. And Claire sent another gift basket, Mom continued, gesturing toward an elaborate arrangement of imported foods. Third one this month. I donate them to the food bank. She pulled out her phone to show us pictures from recent events. There she was at the opera, sitting in Marcus's box. At the museum opening, being introduced to the governor. At the hospital fundraiser, where she'd been asked to speak about her experience raising successful children as a single mother. This one's my favorite though, she said, showing us a photo from her weekly volunteer shift at the community center. She was surrounded by kids from the after-school program, teaching them to cook. No designer clothes, no formal setting, just Mom in her element, sharing her love through food. That's the real you, I said, and she squeezed my hand. All of it's the real me now, she corrected. I'm not choosing between worlds anymore. I can serve soup at the shelter on Tuesday and attend the symphony on Saturday. I can be both. Wednesday afternoon, Dustin arrived for what would be our final couples therapy session. He looked different. The arrogance had been replaced by something almost like humility. He held doors, said please and thank you, actually listened when Dr. Brennan spoke. I've been thinking about what went wrong, he said, addressing me directly. I tried to erase where you came from instead of embracing it. I see that now. Because Marcus showed you, I said quietly. At first, yes. But then I started actually paying attention. Your mother's strength. Your compassion with clients. The way you never gave up on people even when they disappointed you. Even when I disappointed you. It was the closest thing to a real apology I'd gotten from him, but it was too late. Trust, once shattered, could sometimes be rebuilt. But love that had been conditional from the start had no foundation to restore. I want us to end this with dignity, I said. No battles. No bitterness. Just two people admitting we were wrong for each other. He nodded slowly. I can do that. I owe you that much. As I drove through Denver traffic that evening, heading to pick up Mom for Marcus's company gala, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us here. The Hayes family still existed in our periphery, diminished, humbled, forever changed. They attended every event honoring Mom, contributed to her scholarship fund, and treated both of us with exaggerated courtesy whenever our paths crossed. But they were no longer the center of my universe. My world had expanded back to its proper size, filled with meaningful work, genuine relationships, and family who loved unconditionally. I pulled into Mom's apartment complex as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. She was waiting at her window, wearing a midnight blue designer dress she'd bought with her own money. She'd started a small catering business for select clients who appreciated both her food and her story. When she saw my car, she waved, standing tall and proud. This was what victory actually looked like. Not the Hayes family's destruction, though their humbling had been satisfying. Not even Marcus's dramatic return, though having my brother back was a gift I treasured daily. Victory was my mother standing in her window, wearing a dress she chose herself, about to attend a gala where she'd be introduced as Marcus Morrison's mother and Haley Morrison's inspiration. Victory was reclaiming our names, our stories, our worth. As Mom got into my car, adjusting her dress carefully, she looked at me with eyes that sparkled with hard-won peace. "Ready?" I asked. "I've been ready my whole life," she said. "I just didn't know it until now." We drove toward downtown, toward Marcus's building where he waited to escort his mother into a room full of people who would see her for exactly who she was. A woman who'd raised 2 children to understand that love wasn't about power or position or possession. Love meant showing up for the people who matter, even if it takes 7 years to find your way back home. If this story of family redemption and sweet revenge kept you riveted until the very end, hit that like button right now. My favorite moment was when Marcus thundered, "Who dares insult my family?" from the doorway, completely changing the power dynamic in seconds. What was your most satisfying moment? Share it in the comments below. Don't miss more powerful stories of justice and family loyalty. Subscribe and tap that notification bell so you never miss an upload.